Today in the shop, we're working on my C10 pre-runner, and we're about ready to get this bad boy over to the dyno and tune it. But I thought before we did that, we'd go through how we're controlling this engine. And Zach from HP Tuners, and actually the whole HP Tuners crew, is in the house to make sure this thing works perfectly. But Zach is gonna talk us through all the hard parts and the software as well. He's a powertrain engineer. So let's start with what's controlling this engine. So we're going to start with the core ECU and the actual harness itself. What have we got on this truck?
We have a core ECU on this truck that is running a Gen 3 LS engine. Since we're doing a LS swap, that brings to mind the core ECU as it was designed for LS swaps. HP Tuners has a lot of experience in the stock ECU calibration and diagnostics, and we now have brought that to the standalone market.
Once you get this ECU under the hood, what LS engines are we controlling with this?
So the LS engines we support is the Gen 3 and Gen 4 LS. And we also have support for the cable and electronic throttle, and also support for the automatic 460 and 480E transmissions.
So all the popular LS stuff?
Correct.
Okay, and not only the ECU, it's also an all-new harness, right?
That's correct. Yes, so the harness was designed from the ground up. We actually did even measurements on the engine to make sure it would fit like a factory harness. So when you go to install it on the engine, it has a natural flow through the engine bay and looks like it's been well thought out.
Person home now has their core ECU mounted. They got all their harness hooked up to the engine, and they've plugged in their laptop into the ECU. What's the first thing they're going to do?
First thing they're going to want to do is load up our software that matches with the core ECU called VCM Live.
Okay.
And when you first open VCM Live, you're going to have a choice to pick your base tune file, right?
Okay.
And in this case, you're going to pick Open Tune from the PC. When you pick this, it's going to ask you what transmission you're using first. So in this case, we're going to click on manual transmission. And then it's going to ask what reluctor wheel and whether you're electronic throttle or your cable throttle. So in this case, that'll be a drive-by cable 24X base map. And then in that base map, we basically pre-select all the sensors that will connect into our harness.
Okay.
So when you first walk into the software, it's going to confirm, hey, what sensors are you utilizing off of our harness, right? Because we have all these connections here, right, on this harness, but you may not be using all of them depending on your particular setup. In this case, we have a map sensor here, right, which is required to start up the engine. And in here, we can double click in here, and we have our pre-selections for those sensors.
And because we're running turbos, we're running a different map sensor than you would normally have in this base calibration.
Correct, yes. So in the base calibration, typically it's a 1-bar map sensor, but since we're running the boost, we actually opted for the GM LSA sensor to allow us to be able to read that boost level.
Okay, all right, so we select that sensor.
Yep,
Right.
and then it's gonna pre-populate our slope and offset here, which is our scaling for that sensor,
Okay.
which is what we just selected. And your input's already pre-selected for this harness,
Okay.
right? So you really don't have to touch that, just there in case you decide to move that.
Gotcha,
So,
okay.
We have robust diagnostics in here. And you'll want to make sure your DTC bounds are also set up for whatever boost level that you are running, so then you don't accidentally hit a DTC bound, right? That you don't want to touch on.
So it's measuring the actual boost, and you can set it up here so that if that boost is outside those parameters, it'll put a check engine light.
Right, it'll put a check engine light, so then you know, hey, you need to go check out what's going on with that sensor. Like what happened? You need to go back and look at what happened and maybe adjust these bounds. So basically you do all your configuration here first, what sensors you're using. And then after that, you're gonna wanna go into Tune and Setup Wizard here. And basically what we'll have in here is, it's basically the same copy of what you just selected in here. And then for fuel injectors, we'll scroll down to fuel injectors here. And we have quite a few lists of injectors. We have the base GM injectors, fuel injector clinic injectors, Injector Dynamic. So the popular aftermarket injectors that people will commonly use. And in this case, we actually are running a set of Injector Dynamics 1050 injectors.
Okay.
And so we'll want to go in here and select them.
All right.
And you select them, it's gonna say, hey, this is what's changing. And then you click OK. And it will confirm, hey, that you want to change these parameters. And you click yes. And then now it's in there for you.
Okay.
So that's a critical part to make sure this engine starts up.
So if this is your first time doing something like this, before you start the engine, it may be worth just going back in and making sure that you've selected the right injectors, select the right reluctor wheel, basically just triple check that stuff before you commit to turning the key.
That's right.
And then after that, you basically have a vehicle that's ready to run, drive, take it to your tuner, and they'll go in and make it run perfect.
That's right.
Okay, so now we are sort of ready to go to the dyno, but not really ready to go to the dyno. I got some more work to do. And Josh is here from HP Tuners, and we're going to talk about some of the hard part items that we need to address before we hit the dyno. So what are some things that people should pay attention to? Let's say someone built their first turbo LS. What are some things they got to watch out for?
Yeah, there's a couple of considerations when you're turbocharging an LS, a V8 like this. So handful of things. We want to make sure we got all the correct sensors to support positive pressure. So we've got an LSA MAP sensor sitting back there at the intake. And we're going to want to add a couple other things too. So the fuel pressure regulator back here at the engine here, we're going to want to make sure that has a vacuum reference. So that's going to make sure that it raises the fuel pressure with boost and compensates for that positive pressure on the other side of the injector.
Okay, now, speaking of controlling that fuel, we've got, with your system, we have 2 wideband O2s.
Correct, yep. So CORE has dual wideband for both banks. So we're going to be able to individually see the air-fuel ratio of both banks and then compensate for that from the ECU.
And placement of the wideband O2 sensors after the turbo.
After the turbo, and then the angle of the sensor is also important. So you're going to want it at somewhat of a vertical angle, just so when condensation builds up, it doesn't stick in the sensor, it has a chance to drain back out.
And we want to get it away from the, like 6 to 8 inches away from the actual turbo.
A decent amount away from the turbo, just so it doesn't cook itself.
But not so close to the tailpipe that regular air contaminates it, right?
That is correct, yeah.
So we got to have a little bit of space there. All right, so now let's talk about spark plugs, because you told me to buy a very specific spark plug.
We did, yeah. So when you're turbocharging a V8 like this, you're not going to want to keep the factory spark plugs in it. They're not designed for boost or really high horsepower applications. This is a truck engine. It's not made for making a ton of horsepower. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a non-projected spark plug, and it's also going to be the correct heat range for boost and kind of high output to kind of control the heat that the porcelain on the spark plug is exposed to. We're also going to want to gap this too. So as you have increased cylinder pressure under boost, it's going to want to blow the spark out. It's going to be harder to produce that spark when there's positive pressure. So we're going to close that gap. So it's basically going to maintain that spark while it's still under high cylinder pressure.
All right, so we got the right spark plugs in, we got our O2 sensor bungs in, I got to add some vacuum ports, I got to finish plumbing up our intercooler, and then we're ready for a dyno run, right?
We are.
Oh, you told me to move the computer.
Yeah, we're probably going to want to move the computer and the fuse box a little bit away from the exhaust. It's getting a little bit close there, just so we don't get too much heat.
And that was my fault. I didn't realize it was going to make that hater pipe so close to that. But now that it's there, all right, so we'll go ahead and move that, and then we'll be ready to run. Put the O-ring back. It's important. So once we finish up these changes underneath our hood, we'll be ready to take this truck over to the dyno. So we've loaded up the C10, got it out of the shop, and now we brought it over here to DBR High Performance. Now, DBR High Performance has a loaded dyno. So it's a hub dyno, so it's gonna bolt onto the rear axle, and this allows the HP Tuner guys to basically tune our engine and figure out how much power this thing is gonna make. So I'm just gonna stand back, let them do their computery things. They'll tell me what they're doing, and I'm sure I'll forget it by the next time I drive this truck.
So everything that you're gonna need is gonna be right here.
So we're going through, we're dialing in the VE, we're dialing in the fuel of the ECU. Basically, we're trying to get the proper air-fuel ratio so we can make the most amount of power.
Now, some of the cool things about the CORE ECU is because it has 2 wideband O2 sensors, we can monitor both banks of the engine, making sure it stays within parameters, and everything was looking good the entire time the truck was on the dyno. One cool feature that they added that I think is pretty neat is what's called a boost cutoff. Now, I'm running mechanical wastegates with 10 pounds of boost inside of them. The engine should never see more than 10 pounds of boost. But if it ever does, the ECU is designed to protect the engine. It will cut fuel out of the engine to make sure it never gets above that 10 PSI range. And now it's time for the final pull. Just under 500 foot-pounds of torque and just knocking on the door of 500 horsepower to the rear wheels means this 60 C10 is gonna be a monster in the dirt.